Welcome to Reformed Thinking. You know, usually when we talk about a medical diagnosis, there is this expectation of clean precision, like engineering.
Right.
You break your arm, the x-ray shows that jagged white line, and the doctor just points and says, well, there it is.
Yeah, it is binary. Broken or not broken.
And that is comforting, honestly. We like things to be visible. We like things to be easily categorized by the human eye. But then, you step into the world of divine providence and human history, and suddenly that x-ray machine just shatters.
Oh, absolutely.
We are looking at a landscape that is, quite honestly, murky. We are looking at a scenario where human eyes constantly misjudge greatness. And so today we are taking a deep dive into an absolutely fascinating historical collision.
It really is.
We are unpacking a concentrated analysis of Genesis chapter 47, specifically verses 7 through 12. And the mission for this deep dive is to extract the theological weight of a very short, seemingly simple encounter between the patriarch Jacob and the Egyptian Pharaoh.
It is an encounter that on paper should take about 30 seconds, right? And it should probably end with someone being executed or, enslaved.
Precisely. The hook for you, the listener, is this. We are about to see two opposing worlds collide. On one side, you have the absolute ruler of the greatest ancient empire on earth.
The apex of human achievement.
Yeah. And on the other side, you have a 130-year-old limping refugee. And the outcome of their meeting completely reverses all human expectations of authority, of blessing, and of what it means to be favored by God.
It is a total reversal.
It is. So to truly grasp the shock of this encounter, we have to construct the historical and cultural context of the room Jacob is walking into. Where are we in history right now?
Well, we need to travel back to approximately 1876 BC.
Okay.
We are working here with the high dating of the Exodus, which places this specific encounter squarely in a period of intense, unrelenting global crisis. A catastrophic 7-year famine has completely ravaged the ancient Near East.
And we need to pause right there because when we hear the word famine today, we might think of an economic downturn or maybe, supply chain issues at the grocery store.
Right, empty shelves for a week.
Yeah. But in 1876 BC, this is an apocalyptic event.
It is the collapse of civilization as they knew it. I mean, we are talking about an agrarian era. There are no modern global supply chains. There is no refrigeration.
No advanced irrigation technology.
Nothing like that. The entire Egyptian economy and really the stability of that entire region of the world depended completely on the annual inundation of the Nile River.
The flooding.
Yeah, the flooding. The snowmelt from the Ethiopian highlands would rush down. It would flood the banks of the Nile and deposit this incredibly dense black silt. That silt was the absolute lifeblood of their crops.
So if the flood does not happen.
If the inundation failed for 1 year, it was a severe crisis. If it failed for 2 consecutive years, you saw mass starvation.
And this is a 7-year failure.
Right. A 7-year failure means total societal collapse. The ground cracks. The livestock die. The seed grain is eaten out of sheer desperation, meaning you cannot even plant for the next year.
People are just reduced to scavenging.
Absolutely. And this ecological disaster has forced the covenant family, the lineage of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, out of the promised land of Canaan.
Their survival just hangs by a thread at this point.
It does. They have run out of food, they have run out of options, and this crisis has brought them right into the heart of a hostile pagan empire.
So let's talk about the man running that empire.
Yeah.
Because the doors of the throne room open, and Jacob is walking in to stand before Pharaoh. This is the guy at the top of the food chain.
The status of Pharaoh in this era cannot be overstated. He possessed absolute ownership over Egypt. He was not a prime minister. He was not a president. He was not even just a standard king.
Right.
He was worshipped as a living deity. The cultural and religious system of Egypt viewed the pharaoh as the literal incarnation of the sky god Horus and the living son of the sun god Ra.
So the people in that room, they do not just respect him, they worship him.
Yes. When you walk into his presence, you are surrounded by the architectural wonders of the ancient world. You are looking at the absolute pinnacle of worldly success, military might, and material wealth.
It is designed to intimidate.
Completely. The people in that room believe they are looking at the man who controls cosmic order. They believe his breath, his favor, and his rituals are what keep the chaotic forces of the universe at bay.
And then the doors open and in walks Jacob,
Yeah.
I mean, the contrast is almost comical if it were not so serious.
Yeah.
By all worldly metrics, Jacob is a desperate refugee begging for asylum. He has no land to his name. His family is fleeing starvation.
And on top of that, the Egyptians possess a strict religious caste system that views shepherds as an absolute abomination.
Oh, that is a huge point.
It is. The agrarian society of Egypt looked at wandering herdsmen as culturally and religiously unclean. The text tells us elsewhere that every shepherd is an abomination to the Egyptians. So Jacob is not just a foreigner. He represents a class of people that the Egyptian elite find repulsive.
They would not eat with them.
No, they would not even associate with them.
And add to this the physical reality of Jacob himself. He is 130 years old. He is physically broken. Decades earlier at the Jabbok River, he wrestled with the angel of the Lord, and his hip was put out of joint.
So he has that limp.
Yeah, he walks into this immaculate throne room with a permanent limp. He is weary, he is displaced, and he probably smells like a nomadic camp.
He is the very picture of human weakness standing before the picture of human supremacy.
I was trying to think of an analogy to ground this scene for you, the listener. Imagine a penniless, displaced person, someone who has, lost everything in a natural disaster, walking into the private top-floor office of a modern trillionaire tech CEO.
That is a good visual.
The immediate assumption, the absolute expectation from everyone in the room is that the refugee is going to beg. They're going to flatter the CEO. They're going to grovel. They're going to say whatever they need to say just to secure a meal and survive the week.
But if we pull back and look at the divine setup operating behind the scenes, we see a completely different reality.
Right.
God orchestrated this specific geopolitical crisis, this massive regional famine, to move the covenant family into Egypt. This is the fulfillment of the sovereign decree given to Abraham back in Genesis chapter 15.
Where God explicitly stated that Abraham's seed would be strangers in a foreign land.
Precisely. God is utilizing the incredible wealth, the grain silos, and the administrative muscle of Egypt to build a temporary incubator for the nation of Israel. Pharaoh thinks he is running the world.
He thinks he is in charge.
He thinks his gods are blessing him with administrative foresight, but he is actually functioning as a secondary instrument in the hands of the living God to preserve his elect people.
And that framing changes everything. Understanding that extreme dynamic, the living God King of Egypt versus the limping, displaced shepherd from Canaan, it makes the very first action in the room completely startling.
It really does.
Let's look at the actual exegesis of the blessing, because the first verb used for Jacob's action when he stands before the throne is that he blesses Pharaoh.
That is correct. The verb is weadrain. And the cultural reality of ancient Near Eastern blessings makes this incredibly significant.
How so?
Well, when Jacob pronounces this blessing, it is not a polite greeting. He is not saying, "Oh, long live the king," or "Good morning, your majesty." In this historical context, a blessing is an objective, binding invocation of divine favor.
So he is conferring something upon Pharaoh.
Yes. By opening his mouth to pronounce a blessing over Pharaoh, Jacob is claiming spiritual supremacy over the monarch. He is invoking the favor of Yahweh upon the head of the Egyptian empire.
Wow.
Yeah, he is demonstrating that Pharaoh's empire actually stands under the dominion of the God of Abraham.
Okay, hang on. I have to step in here. He's relying on Pharaoh for his next meal. Isn't it incredibly arrogant to walk in and act like the superior in the room?
It seems like it.
I mean, if I did that to a CEO while asking for a job, if I walked in and said, "I confer my blessing upon your corporation," I would be thrown out by security in 5 seconds. How does a starving shepherd dare to claim superiority over the man feeding him?
It looks like pure audacity to the natural eye. It looks like arrogance. But the text is doing something highly intentional to show us that this is not personal pride. This is about a prophetic office.
Okay.
The author, Moses, uses a specific literary framing device here. Before we had bold text or highlighters or bullet points, ancient writers used structural bookends to draw the reader's attention to a main theme. We call this an inclusio.
So it is like putting parentheses around a concept.
Spot on. Jacob blesses Pharaoh at the beginning of the meeting in verse 7, and he blesses him again at the end of the meeting in verse 10.
Okay, I see.
The entire conversation is bracketed by the blessing of the patriarch. It is a calculated, holy placement by Moses. It shows that Jacob is acting out of a God-given dignity. And this brings us to a major structural rule for covenant theology found in the New Testament.
In Hebrews, right.
Yes. Hebrews chapter 7, verse 7 states plainly, "The lesser is blessed by the greater."
The lesser is blessed by the greater. So physically, politically, economically, Pharaoh is the greater. But spiritually, covenantally, he is the lesser.
When you look at the social rank, sure, Pharaoh is superior. But in terms of covenant standing, Jacob is the heir of the divine promise. The text is teaching a massive principle about the source of the church's legitimacy.
Right.
The covenant community does not derive its legitimacy from the state. The church does not beg for its validity from secular rulers. Even in a position of total physical dependency for food, the covenant family is not spiritually inferior to the nations.
Despite having zero earthly wealth.
Exactly. The covenant bearer holds a higher spiritual status than the supreme ruler of the pagan world.
That shifts the entire perspective of the encounter. He does not walk in with his head bowed, apologizing for existing. He enters with a blessing, and he leaves with a blessing.
Yes, he does.
But let's look at what happens in the middle of those bookends, in the middle of that inclusio. After that initial blessing, Pharaoh asks a question. He looks at Jacob and asks, "How many are the days of the years of your life?"
Which is a very specific way to phrase it.
And this question reveals an intense Egyptian obsession with longevity, doesn't it?
It does. Pharaoh looks at this incredibly old, weathered man and is immediately struck by his age. To understand Pharaoh's question, we need to understand the concept of Ma'at.
Matt. Okay, unpack that for us.
Ma'at was the ancient Egyptian concept of truth, balance, order, harmony, law, morality, and justice. To the Egyptian mind, the gods established a perfect rhythm for the universe.
Like a cosmic clockwork.
Right. This included the flooding of the Nile, the rising of the sun, and the lifespan of a righteous man.
So they equated a long life with being in sync with the gods.
Yes. In Egyptian culture, there was a huge fascination with age as a marker of cosmic harmony. We have ancient texts like the Instruction of Tahotep, which show that the ideal, perfect lifespan in Egyptian thought was precisely 110 years.
110 years.
Reaching 110 meant you had lived an incredibly favored life, in perfect harmony with cosmic order. You had figured out the secret to existence.
And Jacob is 130 years old, so he is blown right past their ideal lifespan by 2 entire decades.
He really has.
To the Egyptian court, he would have looked like a man who possessed some untouchable secret to life. They would have been astonished. This is the moment where, in any standard human interaction, Jacob should puff out his chest.
Oh, for sure.
He could boast. He can say, "I'm 130. I have outlived your greatest sages. I have 12 strong sons. I have wealth back in Canaan. I am clearly favored by the divine."
He has the perfect opportunity to validate himself using their cultural metrics. But instead of boasting, Jacob utilizes a highly specific Hebrew word to define his long life.
What does he use?
He calls it mogere. It translates to sojourning. He defines his entire century-plus of existence, not by his achievements, not by his wealth, and not by his family size, but as the life of a resident alien.
A resident alien.
He consciously chooses a word that means he is a stranger, just passing through.
That is fascinating. We were talking earlier about what it means to be a sojourner, and I brought up the analogy of living in a hotel room.
Right, right.
You are living out of a suitcase. You do not knock down the walls in a hotel room to build an addition because you know you are leaving. But you pointed out that a hotel room is actually far too comfortable of an analogy for the ancient world.
It is. A hotel room implies you are a paying customer with rights. You have a lock on the door, you have customer service, you have legal protections.
You can call the front desk.
Yeah. But in the ancient world, a sojourner had zero legal standing. You are living on a visa that can be revoked at any second by a capricious king. You have no police protection. You could be assaulted, robbed, or enslaved, and you would have no recourse in the courts of that land. You are entirely dependent on the goodwill of the host, or in Jacob's case, entirely dependent on the invisible promise of God.
So it is a state of total vulnerability.
Total vulnerability. And there's a continuous thread of this identity throughout Scripture. The Septuagint, which is the ancient Greek translation of the Old Testament, translates this Hebrew word migure as pariki.
Wait, perikia, is that where we get the English word parochial?
It is the root for it, yes. And it is the precise term the New Testament uses for the church's status on earth. For instance, in 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 17, believers are told to conduct themselves with fear throughout the time of their exile, or their parochia.
So Jacob is laying down the theological vocabulary for the entire life of faith right here in Pharaoh's throne room.
Jacob is teaching the Egyptian court, and Moses is teaching the Israelites wandering in the wilderness who originally read this text, that the life of faith is a pilgrimage.
You do not possess final earthly rest right now.
No, you don't. The patriarchs lived in the land of promise as strangers. They lived in tents. They looked beyond immediate physical possession to the faithfulness of God.
Yeah.
Jacob refuses to treat Egypt, or even his past 130 years in Canaan, as his final rest. He lives under a promise, not under possession.
It really makes you stop and look at your own life, doesn't it? If the patriarchs view their entire lives as just passing through, it fundamentally challenges our modern obsession with building our own little permanent empires here.
Oh, absolutely.
We are called to embrace that exact same pilgrim identity. We should be intensely grateful for temporary shelter. We give thanks for daily bread, for civil peace, for employment, but we must never root our souls in the immediate culture.
That is the danger.
The world constantly shouts at us to build our heaven right here, to measure our lives by the possessions we accumulate or the status we achieve. And Jacob's vocabulary of sojourning strips all of that away. You are passing through.
And Jacob does not stop there. He does not just call his life a temporary stay. He gives a shockingly blunt assessment of the quality of his life.
Yeah, he does.
It is an honest confession of living in a fallen world, and frankly, it shatters a lot of modern religious expectations about what a blessed life is supposed to look like.
Let's look at that because Pharaoh asks about his age, and Jacob says the days of the years of his sojourning have been few and evil.
Few and evil.
The phrase is mahuaram. He openly admits his days have been short. Now, 130 sounds incredibly long to us, but he is comparing himself to his fathers, right?
Yes. Abraham lived to be 175. Isaac lived to be 180. So Jacob says his days have been comparatively few. But more significantly, he calls them evil.
Evil days. I mean, he is standing in front of a king who demands absolute positivity. Pharaoh represents cosmic order, harmony, the ideal state of being, and Jacob just lays it out there.
He does not hold back.
He says his life has been filled with sorrow. And when you look at the actual events making up those 130 years, you see the scars.
You see massive, unrelenting trauma. Let's just walk through the life of this man whom God loved.
Okay, let's do it.
He had to flee for his life from his twin brother Esau, who intended to murder him.
Right.
He endured grueling decades of hard labor and constant deception under his father-in-law, Laban. He suffered the agonizing, tragic death of his beloved wife, Rachel.
She died giving birth on the side of the road.
Yes, just one tragic event after another. It continues. He faced the horrific defilement of his daughter, Dinah.
And then his sons go on a murderous rampage because of it.
Which made him a pariah in the land. And perhaps most intensely, he spent decades drowning in grief because he believed his favorite son, Joseph, had been ripped to pieces by wild animals.
He lived for years just looking at that blood-stained coat.
He has known the bitter consequences of his own deceit, the sins of his family, and the general misery of a groaning creation. Faith did not erase the scars of living east of Eden for Jacob.
And this directly contradicts so much of the teaching we hear today. We are surrounded by the modern prosperity gospel and various triumphalist movements.
Oh, everywhere.
Those movements claim that divine favor guarantees a smooth, wealthy, pain-free existence. They tell you that if you just have enough faith, you will not suffer, you will not get sick, you will always close the business deal.
It is a massive distortion.
But think about the metrics in this throne room. If worldly success, perfect health, and a pain-free life were the metrics of God's favor, then Pharaoh was the blessed son of God, and Jacob was completely cursed.
Which is the exact opposite of the spiritual reality.
Yes.
God's favor does not exempt his people from famine, from physical weakness, or from tears. Jacob's blunt honesty here is vital for us to grasp. Notice that his honesty is not atheistic bitterness.
That is a great distinction.
He complains of the sorrow, he calls the days evil, but he does so while dispensing divine blessings to the king.
So he holds those two realities simultaneously.
He does. Christians can deeply lament their circumstances. We can speak truthfully about the pain of death, disease, and betrayal while maintaining absolute trust in a sovereign God.
You do not have to pretend that an evil day is a pleasant day to be a faithful Christian.
No, you do not need a polite religious varnish.
That is such a relief. You can say, this hurts, this is awful, my body is failing, my family is broken, and still pronounce a blessing. You could still trust the sovereign hand of God.
Amen.
And the text immediately moves to validate that trust because Jacob makes his confession of sorrow, and it is immediately met with a demonstration of God's meticulous care.
The narrative shifts, doesn't it?
It does. It shifts from the palace conversation to the practical reality outside the palace walls, proving that God governs even this horrific famine for his redemptive goals.
We see a stark, Intentional literary contrast in the rest of Genesis chapter 47. Just outside the palace walls, the famine is absolutely devastating the native population.
The regular Egyptian citizens.
Right. They are running out of options. First, they exchange all their money for grain. When the money runs out, the famine still rages, so they trade their livestock.
Their means of production.
Gone. When the livestock is gone, they trade their land. And eventually, they trade their very freedom. They voluntarily sell themselves to Pharaoh, becoming state-dependent servants just to get a ration of bread.
Total economic collapse and societal subjugation. The entire nation becomes entirely dependent on the state just to breathe another day.
Yes, but look at what happens to Israel. While the native population is losing everything, the covenant family is freely settled in the best of the land, in the region of Goshen or Ramesses.
They are given a holding.
They are granted property rights in a foreign land during a global crisis. And the text says Joseph provided them with food. The verb used here is kelim. It means to sustain, to nourish, to support.
And it is not just a cold, bureaucratic distribution of rations, is it?
Not at all.
Joseph feeds them with absolute tenderness. The provision is specifically calibrated to the little ones. The phrase is lam lipihap, bread according to the mouths of the dependents.
And this brings us to a massive theological framework regarding the doctrine of providence. We are looking at God's absolute, particular providence over his corporate people.
Unpack that a bit.
Well, he does not leave the survival of the covenant lineage to chance, and he does not rely on the random goodwill of a pagan state. God does not just ordain the big picture. He ordains the precise, microscopic details of their survival.
Down to the bread for the little ones.
Exactly. But notice how he does it. He uses ordinary, appointed means. In this case, Joseph's administrative brilliance, the grain silos, and Pharaoh's political favor to enact miraculous preservation.
I have to ask about that, though. If God is completely sovereign over this famine, if he is pulling all the strings and decreeing whatsoever comes to pass, why use Joseph's political administration at all?
It is a fair question.
I mean, God fed Israel with manna from the sky later in the wilderness. Why not just rain down manna right then and there in Canaan? Why go through the agonizing trouble of Joseph having dreams, being sold into slavery by his brothers, rotting in an Egyptian prison, interpreting Pharaoh's dreams, and building massive grain silos over 7 years?
It seems like a very long way around, doesn't it?
Yeah. Why use all these complex human mechanisms?
That is the classic question regarding primary and secondary causes. Divine sovereignty establishes human means. It does not cancel them out.
Okay, so they work together.
Right. God ends the survival of the family and the preservation of the messianic line. But he equally ordains the means to accomplish that end. The grain silos, the political favor, and Joseph's stewardship.
So trusting God does not mean waiting around for magic.
Believers are called to trust God and use the practical means he provides. You pray for daily bread, but you also plant the wheat, harvest the crop, and bake the dough.
You go to work.
You do. This highlights a strong covenantal responsibility. Joseph is providing for households, taking care of the vulnerable. It shows us that wise planning, hard work, and family responsibility are not contrary to trusting God. They are the very avenues through which God's providence frequently flows.
So we have this incredible scene. The rejected brother, who was sold into slavery by his own flesh and blood, is now exalted to the throne.
Yeah.
He is handing out bread in the middle of a global famine. His father is blessing the nations. It is a beautiful story of redemption and reconciliation. But if we stop there, we miss the entire point of the text, don't we?
We completely miss it. Everything we have unpacked points forward. Genesis is not just a collection of moral fables about how to survive a famine or how to forgive your brothers.
It is a unified redemptive history.
It is.
So let's talk about the true and greater Joseph, the Christological fulfillment of this entire narrative.
We must be careful here to distinguish between redemptive historical typology and flat allegory.
Explain the difference.
Well, we are not saying that every single minor detail in Joseph's life represents a specific Christian doctrine in some secret coded way. We are not looking for hidden meanings in the number of grain sacks or the type of wood used for Pharaoh's chariot.
Right, that gets weird fast.
It does. But Joseph is undeniably a type of Christ. He establishes a historical pattern that finds its absolute perfect fulfillment in Jesus of Nazareth.
The staggering similarities are hard to miss once you see them. Let's look at the parallels. Joseph is the beloved son of his father.
Yes.
He is hated and rejected by his brothers. He is stripped of his robe and sold for the price of a slave. He is cast into a pit, which is essentially a sentence of death.
But then He is raised up.
Raise up, exalted to the right hand of the supreme ruler of the known world.
And he is made the absolute sole dispenser of life-saving bread to a starving world.
And we need to focus heavily on the nature of how that bread is distributed. Because when the brothers come to Goshen and receive this miraculous provision, do they receive it because of their own merit?
Not at all.
Do they earn it?
Yeah, absolutely not. They had sinned grievously against Joseph. They had mocked him, thrown him in a pit, ignored his cries for mercy, and sold him to merchants.
They betrayed him entirely.
They deserved judgment. They deserved to starve in Canaan. But they received the life-saving provision solely based on Joseph's worth, Joseph's exalted position, and Joseph's intercession with the king.
That is the gospel right there.
It is precisely the gospel. In the exact same manner, believers receive eternal life, divine protection, and an incorruptible inheritance entirely through the finished work of their elder brother, Jesus Christ.
Amen.
We approach the throne having sinned, harboring rebellion in our hearts, starving in a spiritual famine of our own making. We have zero merit to offer, but we are fed and preserved solely because Christ was exalted to the right hand of the Father.
He is the true bread of life.
He is. His imputed righteousness is what secures our place in the best of the land.
It is entirely by grace. And even the land itself, Egypt, is part of this massive redemptive pattern. Egypt is currently a refuge for Jacob's family. It is saving their lives from the famine.
For now, yes.
But if you know the rest of the book, if you know the trajectory of the Old Testament, you know Egypt will eventually become a place of brutal bondage for the Israelites. The descent into Egypt in Genesis 47 is setting the stage for the future Exodus.
God is bringing them down into the crucible so he can miraculously bring them up out of it later.
Exactly. The provision in Egypt is temporary. It preserves the lineage so that the promised Messiah can eventually be born through the tribe of Judah.
But Christ fulfills the deeper, true Exodus. By his death and resurrection, he delivers his people not just from a political pharaoh, not just from temporary physical slavery, but from the absolute eternal bondage of sin and death.
Wow.
Jacob stood before Pharaoh as a pilgrim, receiving a temporary parcel of land to wait out a famine. Christ secures a permanent, eternal kingdom for his people.
So let's wrap up this deep dive. We have unpacked the massive theological weight of this single, brilliant encounter. We saw the absolute shock of a limping, displaced refugee claiming spiritual authority over a living God-King, proving that the church does not beg for its legitimacy from the state.
No, it does not.
We learned the vocabulary of the pilgrim, identifying our lives as a temporary sojourn rather than a permanent estate, recognizing that we are living on a visa that belongs to another kingdom.
We looked at the honest confession of suffering in a fallen world, rejecting the false metrics of the prosperity gospel, and learning that we can lament our evil days while still trusting a sovereign God.
And we saw how God's meticulous providence uses human means, ordinary grain silos, and political appointments to preserve his people, all of it pointing forward to the true bread of life, Jesus Christ, who saves us entirely by his own merit.
I will leave you with a final thought to ponder as you consider Jacob's life and his confession before Pharaoh. We so often view our own evil days, our personal traumas, and our seasons of famine as interruptions to God's plan. We look at our suffering and we think something has gone terribly wrong, that the system is broken, or that God has turned his face away.
That is our natural instinct.
But what if the specific hardship you are facing right now, the closed door, the physical weakness, the loss, is the exact unalterable mechanism God is using to settle you precisely where he wants you, preparing you for an inheritance far greater than any earthly palace?